Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today this is gonna be my first real YouTube video, and I thought I would start off with the question I get asked the most, which is why I moved to Germany. I think this is an interesting question because of also the way how people ask me. And it's not just Germans who ask me, but also fellow expats, kind of in this tone like, you're Canadian, why would you leave your country? Isn't Canada a great place to live? Why would you come here? Because I think often Canada gets internationally we have a very good reputation. And that's not to say Canada isn't a great place to live, but I think it's a bit idealized in some sense by a lot of countries around the world. There's some very clear reasons for me why I felt like I wanted to live abroad and why I wanted to live in Germany specifically. So let's jump into the video and I'll try and outline this. Reason number one. So I think one thing about my personality, and probably you can guess by this channel, is that I'm really interested in other cultures and other languages. And so I would say since I was a kid, I've been wanting to travel. I actually never left Canada until I was 20 years old, and that was when I studied abroad for the first time. So I always had an interest in going abroad and traveling abroad. I think when you live in a country, you get to know the culture a lot more deeply than if you are simply there for maybe a couple days or a week or two. So that always appealed to me. I think I'll just show a little bit of a timeline so that it's not confusing what I'm talking about. So I started learning German in 2017. That was my second year of university. I always wanted to learn a language. And to be honest, I could go into a whole video about why I learned German, why I like the language. But I started learning through university courses, and then in the summer times, and also when I was on exchange, I learned it on my own. In 2018, it was my first time leaving Canada to study abroad. I did not study abroad in Germany, interestingly enough. So I went to Rotterdam in the Netherlands for fall of 2018. Absolutely fell in love with European culture, with living abroad, with meeting new people, getting to know Dutch culture. And it really confirmed my ideas that, okay, living abroad is for me, the European way is for me. And I'll touch on some of those topics a bit later about why I connected with it so much. It is so bright on this window. So like I said, I was interested in discovering new culture, new language, and that goes back to a very young age. I think I always had a friend group that was a lot of people in Canada have different backgrounds of where their parents come from or maybe where they come from. A lot of my friends come from different cultures, different countries. I was always a reader from a young age, loved reading about books for different cultures, different countries. When I was a teenager, I had this goal of I want to become a polyglot. I think language and culture are so closely tied together, which is really interesting for me. As you get to know the language, you also get to know the culture, and vice versa. As you get to know the culture, you also understand the language a bit better. Having that depth of experience over a longer period of time, which is what appeals to me the most about living abroad. So that's reason number one. I think also life is so short, why not get the chance to discover something new? You don't pick the country that you're born into. If you have the privilege to go and to discover a new one, I think it broadens your perspective, it broadens your worldview, but it also teaches you a lot about yourself and your own culture. This is kind of one general reason, and as I move along in the video, I'll start sort of more general with, okay, these are general reasons I want to leave Canada or to live abroad, and then more specific to why specifically Germany. So the second reason that I often find hard to explain when somebody's just asking me in a quick getting to know you conversation, but it's one of the main reasons, which is that I feel European culture and society and values fit me a lot better. And then there's some specific ones about Germany that I liked and still like. What do I mean by that? Canada, I would say, is a pretty capitalist country, and very individualist focus. Again, not talking badly about Canada, there's a lot of benefits to that side of our culture as well. But for me, I prefer the European way, which is more socialist in terms of many of the good over the many of the few. There's a lot of more protection rights for consumers, for renters, for employees, rather than the reverse side, the big companies, the landlords, the people who are running the business, the people who have money. The more socialist aspect where we want to support everyone and give everyone a chance to thrive versus the more individualist aspect of Canada, which I think is closely modeled after the US, which is you can thrive if you put the work in, but it's more focused on you have to work. How am I explaining this? Having to explain your own culture is a unique experience. I think what I mean by that is there's many examples, but the social programs, the laws, the protections, even just the bargaining power that EU has and their vision versus I think Canada is more on the side of letting business thrive, less governmental interference, although of course it's not as capitalistic as the United States. It is much more close to the US than it is to Europe, which I think is a misconception that I come across with a lot of international people that I meet. I think also there's just more of a focus on you live to work in Canada versus work to live, which they have in Europe. There's a more emphasis here on having a work-life balance, having time for friends and families and hobbies outside of work, whereas I think Canada is still very focused on, okay, what is it that you do? What's your side hustle? How much do you earn? A lot of, especially in Toronto, which I was living for a year before I moved to Europe, it felt like a lot of your status in society or who you are was determined by your wealth and by your career and by your ambitions. So very career focused. I mean, I think there's differences in Canada as well with the culture of that, but I do find much more a difference here in Europe where people value their time outside of work a lot more. So I think just more of this left-leaning socialist atmosphere values, more values of equality, good for the many versus good for the few. The values are different in society, and that's not to say one is necessarily better than the other, but more that there's a difference. Differences in culture fit different people, and for me, I find myself leaning more towards the left side, which is why I think Europe suits me a bit better. By the way, I know that there's many differences in culture within Europe, but generally speaking, how the societies are organized. Okay, and reason number 3 is the ease of travel. So like I mentioned before, I didn't get to leave Canada until I was around 20, and I always had an interest in seeing more of the world. Europe offers so many opportunities in terms of travel. You have such diversity within a much smaller piece of land. If you look at how massive Canada is, so we don't have much population, we have a lot of land. We have about 40 million people for that huge chunk of land, which means getting around even just within the country usually requires flying if you want to go long distances between provinces. And even within cities or between cities, driving. There's not a lot of great public transit, I would say. Depending on where you are, I mean, when I live in Toronto, it's definitely a bit better. You could survive without a car there, but there's a lot of cities in Canada, I would say it's very difficult to get around without a car. We don't have any neighbors except for US. Within Europe, you have so many countries that all have their own unique culture, language, landscape, history. The richness is incredible. It's so easy to get around. I mean, you can take a cheap airline. There's many discount airlines like Ryanair, Wizz Air, EasyJet. Granted, I know that's not the best for the environment, so there is kind of a con to that fast travel, but there's also other options like train. You can take trains between different countries. Flixbus, which is a favorite of mine, although it can be a bit of a long ride, but they have cheap discount rates to get between different European cities. So I was able to go on weekend trips to Copenhagen, for example, or to Poland for a couple of days. I got to travel actually a lot in the last 2.5 years that I was here. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm out of breath. Whew. Take a sip. So for someone like me who's very interested in discovering new cultures, languages, having that ease of travel has definitely been a big perk. And yeah, like I just want to shout out the public transit, especially where I'm living in Hamburg, but also the major cities in Germany, Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich. But I think Hamburg is actually one of the best. I think it was voted one of the best for several years in a row. You can take the U-Bahn, you can take the S-Bahn, you can get around with buses, and on the weekends it's available 24/7. And that's something that I still don't take for granted to this day. As someone who doesn't have an interest in driving and doesn't want to own a car, this is perfect for me. Okay, and the fourth reason is the economy and the job opportunities. Now, this is back in 2021 when I moved to Germany. So at the time in 2021, for the type of work that I was doing, which was working in data analytics, Germany had a lot of opportunities. I think they still do to some extent, but the economy is not what it used to be. But at the time in 2021, looking for English-speaking jobs in tech, there were a lot of opportunities available and for decent pay and also with lower cost of living. Considering in Canada, where at the time when I was graduating, I think the only major cities that would have good opportunities for me would be maybe Toronto or Vancouver, possibly Montreal, but you need most of the time French to live there. I got lucky and was able to find a job pretty fast. Actually, since then, I would say that was a bit of an anomaly because the job search process in Germany can be long. But for tech jobs, at the time, there was quite a few opportunities. Because Germany is going through this digitalization process, they're trying to catch up essentially to move all the old processes into the new digital version. I think I'll talk about in another video how I found a job in Germany, how to find a job in Germany, because I have a lot of experience and tips for that. I think just the combination of the cost of living plus the decent salaries and the opportunities. For example, you can take Toronto, which did have a lot of opportunities, but had extremely high cost of living where you're giving such a huge portion of your paycheck to rent and then also to food and everything else. Hamburg, where I live, is also relatively high cost of living in Germany, but still I pay much less in rent for a bigger apartment than what I had in Toronto. So that's something to keep in mind. Then let's get into the most specific reason about Germany, which is the culture and the language. I could get into so many reasons about this, of random things I like in Germany, but I will just broadly say some of them. So first thing is the language. That's the first thing I fell in love with. I love learning languages, but this one specifically, even though the grammar is difficult, even though it's a bit more of a challenging language than something compared to a Latin language perhaps, I love it. I love how the words are compounded. I love how it sounds. When I speak German and hear German, it actually genuinely makes me happy. I've also gotten a lot of weird reactions about, but it's like personal taste. Some people like pizza, some people like Chinese food, some people like Indian, Mexican, and then other people don't like those. It's a personal taste thing, and the same with languages. Some people like French, Italian, want to study those and say, ugh, why would you study German? To me, I've never understood the myth that German is a harsh language. I have never understood that. I think it sounds beautiful. I'll probably talk about this in another video. I have so many video ideas, but one of them of why I love, all the reasons why I love German language. But I started studying it in courses and then I kept going on my own in between in summers and after I graduated university and continued studying on my own because I loved it so much. It's something that brought me joy. Again, you get to know the culture through the language. And there's a lot of things about the German culture that I like. I mean, for example, how direct and honest they are. They are such genuine people who are willing to help you out whenever you're in trouble or even just to make your day better. I have so many little stories and anecdotes like that where Germans helped me or explained something when they didn't need to. The honesty and directness is so appreciated, especially in a work context, but also in day-to-day, that you know exactly what people are thinking and they welcome the feedback in return. Just how fact-based and logic-based they are as a society. For example, I love watching German documentaries. They have so many good ones just on YouTube about so many different topics where I find a lot of American or British or Canadian documentaries they're very emotion driven, or the narrator is trying to drive you towards their point of view, whereas I think German docus, as they're called, are really more from a rational perspective, very evidence-based. Again, they're very curious and open-minded people. So Germans, I find, are super well-traveled. They're great conversationalists because they're genuinely interested in asking you questions rather than trying to push or sell their idea of who they are onto you. And also this idea of, Canadian small talk is very superficial. It's nice, and maybe it's kind of the social lubricant that makes people get along, but I prefer, honestly, to have a real genuine interaction with a person and to have a real genuine conversation with somebody rather than just superficial, how are you, fine. Again, I'll make another video about random things, but we cannot forget the bread and the beer. Bäckereis and Brot. Love it. And also there's, like, it goes back to my point before about it being less capitalist here. There's so many local cafes, local restaurants, rather than the chains that you will see over and over again in Canada. I mean, you can walk down the street in Toronto and you'll find a Starbucks on every single block. But here in Hamburg, you walk down the street and you find such cool, cute cafes that are locally owned, not chains. I love this. It's a much more cozy feeling. And Germans also have this culture of Kaffee and Kuchen. You go maybe on the Saturday or Sunday with your friend, have some coffee, have some cake, sit there, chat, catch up. It's much more focused about these small moments and spending quality time with one another than it is in Canada, where it feels very go, 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 and things have to have a specific economic outcome, or things have to be super efficient rather than just enjoying the time. So anyway, these are all my personal opinions. Take it with a grain of salt. If you have a different opinion about the culture in Canada or Germany, or your country versus Germany, I would love to hear it in the comments down below. That's it for today's video. If you're interested in watching more, I'll put up a recent video here on this screen, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!